Tonight, the clock is ticking with punishing tariffs expected to be unleashed in just hours. Donald Trump crushes hope that Canada can stave off his economic weapon.
And is there anything China, Canada, and Mexico can do tonight to forestall your implementation of tariffs tomorrow?
No.
Is this the start of a new trade war? And what it could mean for the price you pay.
I think we're being bullied, and I'd like to do what I can.
How Canadians are taking matters into their own hands. Chilling new images of the mid-air collision in Washington. What has led investigators to restrict the airspace? Plus,
my hands go numb, I lose my grip.
Who is backing the new probe into the mystery disease making hundreds of Canadians sick?
All we really want as patients is answers.
And a new space discovery junked.
Our garbage doesn't disappear, even in space.
How a drifting convertible caused a cosmic mix-up.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. We are just hours away from Donald Trump's looming tariff deadline. The U.S. president says nothing can be done to stop him from imposing punishing 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada. Trump offered a sketch of his unprecedented plan today, though Canadian officials have yet to be provided any official confirmation of what's coming down tomorrow. CTV's Rachel Aiello starts us off.
They've treated us very unfairly.
U.S. President Donald Trump is going ahead.
Is there anything China, Canada, and Mexico can do tonight to forestall your implementation of tariffs tomorrow?
No, nothing. Not right now, no.
Not a negotiating tool?
No, it's not. No, it's a pure economic. We have big deficits with, as you know, with all three of them.
Bracing for this country to be hit hard as soon as Saturday, Justin Trudeau said Canada will retaliate day one.
We won't relent until tariffs are removed, and of course, everything is on the table.
The Prime Minister's comment didn't sit well with Trump's chief spokesperson.
I think Justin Trudeau would be wise to talk to President Trump directly before pushing outlandish comments like that.
With Trump still citing the flow of fentanyl, federal officials in D.C. today tried to promote Canada's border security plan. But despite the last-minute effort to avoid a trade war, Canada has received no official details from Trump's team about what's coming.
The reality is we have yet seen a piece of paper declaring that.
When the tariffs hit, the loonie will likely dip, and the average Canadian household's purchasing power could be reduced by $1,900 annually. Canada's premiers are bracing for that impact.
President Trump is hell-bent on undermining Canada, our workers, our economy, our quality of life.
The looming blow to Canada's GDP and jobs has revived calls to reduce interprovincial trade barriers ASAP.
We love to tell ourselves that we're a trading country, and we are, but at the end of the day, we have a lot of difficulty trading with ourselves. And if not now, then when?
Trump has said he's not looking for concessions and has left the door open to levying a 10% tariff on Canadian oil and gas later next month. Heather?
All right, Rachel, thank you. Many Canadians are trying to take control and do their part to support the economy on this side of the border with a Buy Canadian approach. That includes what food is being put in the grocery cart. But it's easier said than done. CTV's Heather Wright spoke with shoppers in Toronto to find out how they are managing.
So I've got decaf tea.
When Ellen does her grocery shopping, she pays attention to where products are from.
This is a local yogurt.
She tries to buy local or Canadian-made items whenever she can, but it's not always possible.
So where are these from?
It just says USA.
And is there a Canadian alternative?
Not that I'm aware of.
With tariffs looming, consumers are bracing for an increase in prices at the grocery store. Some, like Noreen Berg, have already stopped buying American goods, opting for frozen fruits and vegetables. It's not just to save money, but to make a point.
Yeah, I think we're being treated poorly. I think we're being bullied, and I'd like to do what I can.
Depending on the product, there often is a Canadian option. All of these apples are either grown in the United States or Canada, but depending on the time of year, it is very hard to buy certain things from this country. For example, all of these oranges are imported from the United States or other countries.
Grocery store manager Jake Burkhart says they are trying to diversify where they buy products from, but with fresh produce, it's hard.
Generally, it is the States, so with those tariffs, it's going to be a large hit to the industry.
And after decades of free trade, it can be difficult to know what is Canadian and what isn't.
Kraft peanut butter is made in Montreal with peanuts from the United States with a brand owned by an American company. So is that a Canadian product or an American product?
Dairy, eggs, and meat are often Canadian products, but a lot of seafood and packaged goods are imported from the United States.
Canada has drawn up an extensive list of U.S. products to be taxed, with prices on both sides of the border expected to rise quickly once any tariffs are put in place. Heather Wright, CTV News, Toronto.
Stock markets on both sides of the border and the Canadian dollar ended the day lower on the confirmation that Donald Trump's tariffs will take effect. In the U.S., the Dow Jones fell 337 points, while the TSX also had a triple-digit loss, dropping 275. And the Canadian dollar also taking a hit, landing today at 69 cents U.S. Liberal leadership hopeful Mark Carney is vowing to scrap the consumer carbon tax if he becomes the next party leader.
So it means that you'll no longer have to pay more to fuel your car or heat your home. But when you choose an energy efficient appliance or an electric car or home insulation, you will be rewarded, and we will get the big polluters to pay for it.
Carney says Canada's current climate policy has become too divisive and says he will instead offer Canadians incentives to go green. For more, we turn to CTV's chief political correspondent and host of Power Play and Question Period, Vassy Kapelos. A lot to break down today, Vassy. Let's start with the Liberal leadership race. What's your take on what we heard today from Mark Carney?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. He's moved away from the consumer carbon price, but totally unsurprising. And that is because the policy itself, the carbon tax, has become so deeply unpopular and so much so associated with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And so I think this was expected. The campaign had certainly signaled it would go this way. Whether it convinces, people beyond the Liberal leadership race, Canadians writ large, that, this individual in particular, Mr. Carney, who has in the past stood by the consumer carbon price, will move away from it, I think is a different story. But at this point in time, in order to clear the way for other policies and sort of a different message, something that differentiates himself from the current prime minister, he kind of had to do this. It's also worth pointing out that Chrystia Freeland, his main opponent, did the same thing.
Right, of course. All right, Vassy, let's go back to tariffs for a moment and news they will be implemented beginning tomorrow. The implications of this are huge for Canadian politicians, to even put it mildly.
Yeah, very much so. It's honestly like a tectonic, earth-shattering thing in Canadian politics. Everybody is reorienting all over it, or around it, I should say, the leadership race, each of the political parties, mainly because the big question is, does this become the big ballot box question whenever the election is held? It feels that way right now. Heather?
Vassy Kapelos, thank you for your insight. Canada's tariff trouble will be deep and far-reaching. Coming up later in the show, we check in with Canadian farmers on their growing fears. Just in time for tax season, the federal government says it's delaying its planned changes on capital gains. The new rules will now be deferred until January 2026. The government also plans to bring in new exemptions to ensure most middle-class Canadians don't end up paying more. The increase would affect those with $250,000 or more in capital gains earnings. To some developing news now, and just days after a catastrophic mid-air collision in Washington, a small private plane has plummeted to the ground near a busy mall in Philadelphia just 30 seconds after takeoff. A dash cam caught the dramatic moment of impact. Several cars and homes caught fire from the explosion. The Federal Aviation Administration said at least 6 people were on board the medical transport jet, including a child patient en route to Springfield, Missouri. The FAA and National Transportation Safety Board are investigating. And this comes at a time when investigators are still piecing together that deadly mid-air crash in Washington. Tonight, all black boxes have been recovered, even as the crews struggled through bad weather to find more victims. CTV's Geneviève Bushman has more.
Recovery crews fighting wind, rain, and fog continue to scour the Potomac, searching for bodies and for clues. But the fuselage will have to be moved using heavy equipment for other victims to be recovered.
Our dive teams are working in targeted areas, and additional Coast Guard assets will arrive this afternoon.
Tonight, investigators revealed they had recovered the black box from the helicopter. The plane's data and voice recorders were already in a lab.
I can tell you from a visual inspection, we saw no exterior damage that would indicate that it was compromised at this time.
Black boxes could yield data that could help answer key questions about the Army helicopter's flight path. Video showing new angles of the crash show the Black Hawk was on what's called Route 4. It's used by government and medevac helicopters, and aircraft are supposed to fly below 61 meters. But reports suggest it broke that ceiling, deviating to a much higher altitude before the mid-air crash. That route and another used by helicopters are now closed at Reagan Airport until further notice. The skating community has lost promising young athletes, coaches, and parents, and more is coming to light about other victims as well tonight.
Based off of the exhibits.
Among those killed, a beloved biology teacher seen here on a field trip. Students and colleagues say Mrs. Fields, Lindsay Fields, was passionate about getting her students to embrace science, always going above and beyond.
And so we're just trying to move forward and honor what we can of what Lindsay did for us, which was everything.
Recovery efforts are expected to continue on the river nearby here. Investigators hoping the weather will improve. Heather.
Geneviève Bushman in Washington tonight. Thanks, Jen. A woman behind a killing that shocked British Columbia has been arrested while out on parole. Carrie Sim, who changed her name from Kelly Ellard, had been allowed day parole regularly since 2017. She was serving a life sentence for drowning 14-year-old Rena Verk as a teenager in 1997. Police in the U.S. have lifted the veil on a decades-old murder case with a surprising Canadian connection. They've identified a woman who had been living in a small Alberta town as La Pistolera, wanted for murders in Missouri and Mexico in the 60s. CTV's Quinn Keenan has the story.
Deidre Glabus died quietly in 2022 at the age of 81 in the corn capital of southern Alberta. She was well known in Taber, a town of 9,000, working as a realtor and volunteer. Outliving 2 husbands in the community, she left behind 1 son, but her legacy is now much more shocking.
Yeah, the Taber Police Service had no idea of the background of this individual. This individual was never brought to light in any type of law enforcement investigation that we're aware of that occurred in our community.
Glabus had been on the run for a series of murders dating back to 1960. Her real name was Sharon Kinney. She was the subject of one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history and was featured on Unsolved Mysteries. Originally from Independence, Missouri, in 1960 she was charged with shooting and killing her first husband and her boyfriend's wife. She was released from prison in 1963 on bond and fled to Mexico. That's where, in 1964, she killed a man during a robbery and was sentenced to 13 years in prison and then escaped in 1969. Mexican police called her La Pistolera and American police called her Pistol Packin' Mama. Somehow she made it to Alberta in 1979.
She was well known here for the decades that she lived.
After her death in 2023, someone in Taber tipped off sheriffs in Jackson County, Missouri, about Glabus's real identity. Fingerprints eventually proved to be a match.
In what can only be described as a fortunate turn of events, Sergeant Love was able to confirm Sharon Kinney had been living under an assumed name in Alberta, Canada.
Police and those who knew her are equally surprised.
She just seemed to be really nice and personable, and yeah, I'm just totally shocked. I mean, how can you be one person and totally be this other person.
The unraveling of her life finally revealed this week. The case is now officially considered closed. Quinn Keenan, CTV News, Tabor.
Coming up after this short break.
Our garbage doesn't disappear, even in space.
Cosmic confusion. Is that an asteroid or a Tesla? Plus, how Canadian farmers are preparing for Trump's tariffs. Turning back to our top story tonight and the impact of Donald Trump's incoming tariffs. Among those set to feel the punch of that economic tool, Canadian farmers. CTV's Alex Carpa digs into their fears for the future.
These weigh about 800 pounds.
Also weighing on Ian Smith's mind are the 25% tariffs from Donald Trump.
Oh, this is going to be a disaster to all farmers, and more so to the hog industry, because we're a big exporter to the U.S. and weanlings and feeder pigs and that too.
Canadian hog farmers are highly reliant on the U.S. market, especially those in Manitoba, which is the largest pig-producing province in the country.
It would be a challenge, definitely, if that tariff would come in.
Rick Bergman, who exports between 35 to 40,000 of his pigs to the U.S. annually, says the tariffs would gravely impact his business.
If there's a stoppage that is so impactful that trade stops, or is dramatically minimized, what do we do? There's a lot of jobs actually at stake with this.
Here's an example of how interconnected the industry is. Manitoba exports between 3 to 3.5 million live pigs into the U.S. every year. That's worth about $200 million in trade. And it's not just the pork industry that will be impacted. 60% of all Canadian agriculture exports go to the U.S.
When you combine both pork and live animals, the U.S. is our number one market. If that integrated trade between Canada and the U.S. gets interrupted, it will impact farmers on both sides of the border.
There is a possibility that agriculture producers could have an excess of supply, which could down the price of their product if a trade war occurs. Alex Carpa, CTV News, Argyle, Manitoba.
Still ahead, under the microscope. Why a persistent mystery illness has patients anxious for answers. For years, New Brunswick families have fought to find out why so many are suffering lingering effects from a mysterious brain disease. And while a new probe is bringing some hope, others are calling for an independent investigation. Here's CTV's Sarah Plowman.
Mandy Maillet is often extremely tired. She has headaches, balance issues, and pain.
My legs, my hands go numb, I lose my grip, I'm a falling risk.
Recently, she learned there's a tumor growth on one of her ovaries.
And Dr. Marrero feels that that's also connected.
She's a patient of Dr. Alier Marrero, a neurologist who's claimed more than 400 of his patients are suffering from a mystery neurological syndrome, and dozens have died. Maillet welcomes a new investigation into why she and others are sick.
Really hopeful that Holt's government will do the patients right.
The province first raised concerns nearly 4 years ago.
It most likely is a new disease.
But months later ruled that out, saying patients were most likely misdiagnosed.
Public health had significant reason to question the validity of an unknown neurological illness.
Premier Holt campaigned on a promise to relaunch the investigation.
The government is very interested in understanding what is going on.
Provincial and federal public health agency officials are collecting Dr. Marrero's patient data.
We're hopeful that once we get this data recorded, studied by ourselves and the Public Health Agency of Canada, then we can understand what it is that's happening.
A neurologist and former head of Canada's agency that funds health research wants the probe to be looked at by an arm's-length panel.
No matter what report is going to come forward, you're going to have a cluster of individuals who are not going to be satisfied that the report is either transparent or that it's heard their complaints.
I would rather it be outsourced. I would rather it not be government.
Maya also wants any probe to be thorough. She wonders if what's making her sick is environmental.
I truly hope that proper investigation comes from this.
New Brunswick's health minister insists this investigation will be independent, noting that public health officials in this province are collaborating with the Public Health Agency of Canada. Sarah Plowman, CTV News, Fredericton.
Still ahead, how a cosmic mix-up took astronomers for a ride. NASA and the European Space Agency are keeping a close eye on a newly discovered asteroid orbiting around the sun that has a small chance of striking Earth in 2032.
And it's only about maybe 100, 300 feet wide. So it's very hard to see at this point. But when it passes us in 4 years, around December of 2028, that's when we're going to get a much better look and get a better sense of what the real risk is.
The asteroid was spotted by a telescope in Chile, and based on measurements so far, it has about a 1% chance of hitting our planet. That asteroid isn't the only thing catching the attention of astronomers. Recently, someone mistook the Tesla Elon Musk sent into space for a space rock. And as CTV's Alison Bamford reports, that's putting a spotlight on all the junk floating above our heads.
Bright dots and not a lot of detail. An asteroid and a Tesla can look similar in still images of deep space.
Honestly, one can argue a Tesla it's an artificial asteroid.
Elon Musk launched his Tesla Roadster into orbit around the sun back in 2018 as a test flight. It's still up there.
Our garbage doesn't disappear, even in space.
Space junk cluttering the sky, a concern Samantha Lawler has raised for years. Most recently, when a piece of SpaceX rocket crashed down on Saskatchewan farmland upon re-entry. But in deep space where the Tesla's in orbit, there's a different worry.
It is less of a hazard to drop on us, but it makes it harder to find the asteroids that are also orbiting the sun.
Experts say it's important to get the numbers right when looking at how many asteroids could pass near Earth, and junk in the way makes those statistics murky.
We're really pushing for regulations to go, when you throw something away in space, at least tell us which way you threw it.
There are databases that track some of the paths, mainly NASA probes, but there's no international registry that groups have to follow.
We need to take a new look at how we govern deep space.
Jonathan McDowell estimates about 1,000 objects orbit the sun, paling in comparison to the 22,000 plus that orbit Earth. But that could change as missions to deep space continue.
If we send enough objects up there, then it will be likely that some of these objects might collide with each other or with a spacecraft that we actually don't want it to collide with.
As for the Tesla, reports suggest it won't collide with anything for another 15 million years. Alison Bamford, CTV News, Saskatoon.
That is our newscast for this Friday night. For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching. Todd Vanderhayden is in for me tomorrow. I'm Heather Butts. Good night.